Whispers in the quiet woods. A veil of morning mist still veiled Oakhaven's thatched roofs as Alara emerged, her worn basket swaying rhythmically. The air, a tapestry of damp earth and the faint, sweet trace of wood smoke from village hearths, beckoned her towards the quiet woods. Gathering herbs, a chore she usually relished, awaited. In these nascent hours, the world felt tender and yielding. She offered a shy nod to Old Man Hemlock, already tending his onion patch, who grunted in reply, his gaze fixed on the emerging green shoots. Alara continued, her senses attuned to the subtle symphony of the awakening forest. Birdsong laced through the rustling canopy, and the distant murmur of the river promised a cool draught for the parched earth. Deeper among the venerable oaks and whispering pines, her fingers danced, deftly plucking the vital herbs, silverleaf for fevers, sunpetal for soothing aches, and the pungent shadow root for more grievous ailments. She hummed a low, tuneless melody, her thoughts drifting to the day's impending tasks, mending her brother's torn tunic, helping her mother grind flour, and perhaps, if the day relented, stealing a few moments with the tattered book Old Man Hemlock had lent her. Suddenly, a sharp crack, like a whip rent through silence, tore the peaceful quiet asunder. Above, a thick, gnarled branch, heavy with moss, groaned ominously. Alara's gaze snapped upwards, her breath snagging in her throat. The bough swayed precariously, a splintering sound echoing in the abrupt stillness of the woods. "Move!" The voice was not of the forest, nor any creature she recognized. It was cold, profound, resonating not in her ears, but directly within the hollow of her skull. A command, utterly devoid of emotion, yet impossibly clear. Alara stumbled backward, her basket scattering herbs across the damp earth. The instant her foot cleared the spot, the ancient branch tore free with a roar, crashing precisely where she had stood. The impact shuddered through the ground, sending a flurry of leaves and debris skyward. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She stared at the fallen branch, then at the empty space she had occupied moments before. A shiver, not entirely of fear, traced its way down her spine. The voice, so immediate, so undeniably real, yet no one else was in sight. The woods were still, save for the persistent chirping of a robin. Carefully, Alara bent to gather her scattered herbs, her hands trembling. She tried to rationalize it, perhaps imagination, a byproduct of sudden fright, but the stark clarity of the command, the way it had bypassed her ears and settled directly into her mind, defied such simple explanations. Throughout the rest of her chores, the memory of the voice lingered like a phantom touch. While assisting her mother with the midday meal, she nearly spilled a pot of boiling water. "Left!" Again, the cold, deep voice, a whisper in her mind. Alara instinctively shifted the heavy pot, just as a loose stone on the hearth shifted, sending a small cascade of embers onto the very spot her hand had occupied. Her mother, oblivious, merely hummed a folk tune. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of lavender and rose, Alara sat by her window, gazing at the first shy stars. The village sounds had softened to a gentle murmur. The voice, it had spoken again, twice, each time a warning, each time it had averted a small mishap. It wasn't malicious. In fact, it seemed protective. Who was it? A spirit of the woods, perhaps? A guardian? Her grandmother's tales of ancient beings communing with mortals flashed through her mind. But this voice felt different. Too precise, too commanding, yet strangely impersonal. It offered no comfort, only instruction. Alara hugged her knees to her chest, a strange blend of confusion and a nascent sense of safety settling over her. She was a quiet girl, easily overlooked in the bustling village, certainly not one to attract the attention of spirits or magical entities. Yet, here it was. A cold, deep voice, a silent sentinel in her mind, diverting small dangers from her path. She didn't understand it, but a peculiar curiosity, a spark she hadn't known she possessed, began to flicker. She wondered if it would speak again, and if it did, what would it warn her of next? The thought was unsettling, yet undeniably intriguing. She watched the moon ascend, a silver disk in the inky sky, and for the first time in a long time, Elara felt less alone, accompanied by the silent, watchful presence within her own mind. The missing locket. The village square buzzed with an unfamiliar energy, a vibrant chaos that usually only accompanied the seasonal harvest festival. Today, however, the excitement stemmed from a traveling merchant, his cart overflowing with wares far more exotic than the usual homespun cloth and local produce. Elara, basket slung over her arm, navigated the throng, her senses alive with the scent of roasted nuts, exotic spices she couldn't name, and the underlying earthy musk of the crowd. Even the usually muted hum of her own thoughts was momentarily drowned out by the cacophony. She had been sent to trade for a new grinding stone, a task that felt monumental amidst the sheer volume of people. Her gaze drifted towards the merchant's display, a glint of gold catching her eye. He was a portly man with a booming laugh, his hands gesturing grandly as he showcased his most prized possessions, a collection of royal trinkets, bracelets of intricate silver, rings set with polished stones, and, nestled on a velvet cushion, a locket of pure gold. It was shaped like a wolf's head, its eyes twin chips of deep sapphire, the craftsmanship undeniably regal. A murmur rippled through the onlookers as he announced its provenance, a gift from the Alpha King himself, intended for a deserving beta leader in a neighboring territory, merely passing through on its journey. Elara found herself drawn closer, the locket's weighty elegance captivating her. The crowd pressed in, a wall of bodies, and she felt a fleeting brush against her side. A quick, almost imperceptible nudge. "Stay back, Elara." The voice, cold and precise, echoed in her mind. It was a familiar companion now, a constant whisper beneath the surface of her thoughts. Though its sudden appearance amidst the market din still startled her, she instinctively recoiled, stepping back from the crush of people, her basket bumping into a sturdy woman laden with textiles. The merchant, momentarily distracted by a bickering couple, returned his attention to his display. His booming laugh died in his throat. His eyes, once twinkling, widened in disbelief. He fumbled with the velvet cushion, his fingers brushing the empty indent where the locket had rested. A hush fell over the crowd, the vibrant energy dissipating into a suffocating silence. "My locket!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with a sudden, desperate panic. "The king's locket! It's gone!" The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. A collective gasp rose from the villagers. The bustling square became a frozen tableau, every face etched with shock and dawning fear. Accusations, hushed at first, then growing louder, began to ripple through the crowd. Eyes darted, searching for a culprit, a scapegoat. Elara felt a prickle of unease. She hadn't moved far from the merchant's stall, still within the immediate circle of onlookers. She recalled the brief, almost imperceptible brush against her side, the cold warning in her mind. Had she seen something? A flash of movement, a furtive hand? The details eluded her, a blur of faces and bright fabrics. Within minutes, the distant clatter of hooves on cobblestones announced the arrival of the royal guard. Two imposing figures, clad in the king's crimson and black, pushed through the terrified villagers. Their eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the faces, their presence radiating an authority that silenced even the most vocal of accusers. Who was near the merchant's display? One of the guards, his voice a low rumble. demanded. A sea of fingers, hesitant at first, then emboldened by the desire to deflect suspicion, pointed. And a terrifying number of them, Ilara realized with a jolt of dread, were pointing directly at her. She stood frozen, her basket now heavy and useless in her hand, the sense of the market turning sour in her throat. The guards' gazes locked onto her, cold and assessing. The world seemed to shrink, narrowing to the hard glint in their eyes, the heavy thud of their boots as they approached. The constant, protective voice in her mind was, for the first time, utterly silent. Journey to the capital. The world blurred into a wash of muted browns and greens as the royal guard, grim-faced and unyielding, led Ilara from the bustling market. Her feet, heavy with dread, stumbled over the familiar cobblestones of her village square, each step an echo of her vanishing freedom. Villagers, who moments ago had offered friendly smiles, now averted their gazes, their whispers a chilling wind against her back. Her mother, her face a mask of crumpled worry, tried to push through the guards, only to be held back by a strong, unyielding arm. Ilara caught her tearful gaze, a silent plea passing between them, before she was steered roughly towards a closed, dark carriage. The interior of the carriage was surprisingly plush, a stark contrast to the rough cart rides she was accustomed to, yet it offered no comfort. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and something vaguely metallic, like freshly drawn blood. 2 guards sat opposite her, their gazes fixed and impassive, their swords resting casually against their knees. The rocking motion of the carriage began almost immediately, a jarring rhythm that mirrored the frantic beat of her heart. Every jolt sent a fresh wave of nausea through her, and she pressed her hands against her mouth, trying to suppress the rising bile. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, a cold, creeping sensation that tightened its grip around her chest. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow. This can't be happening, not to me. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing desperately to wake up from this nightmare. Then, a voice, clearer and more resonant than it had ever been, cut through the din of her despair. Stay calm. Breathe deep. It was a command, yet laced with an unexpected tenderness, like a balm applied to a raw wound. Focus on your breath. In. Hold. Out. Ilara gasped, her eyes flying open. The voice. It was back. Stronger, more present than before. It wasn't just a whisper in the back of her mind anymore. It felt as though it originated from within her, a warm current flowing through her veins. She instinctively followed its instruction, drawing a shaky breath, holding it, then releasing it slowly. The simple act, guided by the voice, brought a surprising measure of calm. The frantic drumming in her chest began to subside, replaced by a steadier rhythm. "Good," the voice murmured, a note of approval in its tone. "You are not alone." The words were a lifeline in the suffocating darkness of her fear. She wasn't alone. Even with the stern guards across from her, even with the world she knew receding further with every turn of the wheels, she had this inexplicable presence. It was a strange comfort, a bizarre anchor in a sea of uncertainty. The journey stretched on, hours blurring into an endless expanse of bumps and jolts. The carriage windows, though small, offered glimpses of a landscape growing steadily grander. Rolling hills giving way to more cultivated fields, and then, in the distance, the faint outline of towering spires. The capital. Her stomach lurched again, but this time the voice was there immediately. "Keep your thoughts steady. Do not show them your fear. They feed on it." Ilara straightened, pulling her shoulders back, a flicker of defiance igniting within her. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She met the unblinking gaze of the guard across from her, holding it until he was the one to look away, a faint furrow appearing between his brows. The victory, however small, was exhilarating. As the sun began its slow descent, Painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the carriage passed through the colossal gates of the capital city. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking, a testament to power and wealth. Buildings of polished stone rose majestically, their intricate carvings catching the dying light. The streets, though still bustling, were wider, cleaner, and filled with people dressed in finer clothes than she had ever seen. The air, once rural and earthy, now carried the sharp scent of exotic spices and something else, something subtle and almost electric, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The voice, quiet for a time, stirred again. "Remember what I told you. Breathe, observe, and trust your instincts." Ilara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, but beneath it, a strange sense of anticipation. She was here, at the heart of it all. And somehow, despite everything, she felt a peculiar strength, a hidden resolve she hadn't known she possessed. Eyes like ice. The carriage jolted to a halt, the sudden silence after hours of rhythmic clatter deafening. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the newfound stillness. Through the narrow, ornate window, she glimpsed the capital. Towers of polished obsidian pierced the bruised twilight sky, their spires tipped with what looked like actual stars. Grand arches, carved with the faces of ancient beasts, spanned wide avenues, and torchlight flickered from countless windows, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. It was magnificent, terrifying, and utterly alien. "We're here, little bird," the inner voice murmured, a low hum of power that vibrated through her very bones. "Remember what I said. No fear." A guard unlatched the heavy door, revealing a colossal iron gate that stood sentinel before a castle so immense it seemed to swallow the sky. Its dark stone walls were scarred with time, yet radiated an unbroken strength. Ilara was ushered out, her legs stiff, onto a cobblestone path lined with more guards, their armor glinting like frost under the lamplit gloom. Their faces were impassive, their gazes like chips of flint. She was led through a series of cavernous halls, each one grander than the last. Tapestries depicting epic battles and mythical creatures adorned the walls, their vibrant colors muted by the torchlight. The air grew colder, carrying a faint scent of old stone and something metallic, like iron. Her resolve, carefully constructed in the carriage, began to fray at the edges. Finally, they stopped before a pair of towering, silver-inlaid doors. Two guards, larger and more imposing than any she'd seen, stood like statues. With a synchronized push, the door swung inward, revealing a chamber that stole the very breath from her lungs. It was the throne room, the ceiling soared, lost in shadows. Pillars of dark marble, etched with glowing runes, reached towards the unseen heights. A crimson carpet, rich and deep as dried blood, stretched from the doors to a raised dais at the far end. And on that dais, upon a throne carved from a single block of obsidian, sat a man. He was broad-shouldered, radiating an aura of absolute command. His hair, dark as midnight, framed a chiseled face. But it was his eyes that seized Ilara, pinning her in place. They were the color of glacial ice, piercing and utterly devoid of warmth. They seemed to see everything, to judge everything, and to fear nothing. "Approach!" His voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings, each syllable laced with an authority that left no room for defiance. It was a voice that could quell a storm, command an army, or freeze a heart. Ilara took a hesitant step, then another, the crimson carpet seeming to stretch endlessly before her. The guards propelled her forward, their hands firm on her back. As she drew nearer, the king's features became sharper, more defined, the harsh lines around his mouth, the almost imperceptible flicker in those pale eyes. She saw it all. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving her. "You are Ilara of the Sunstone Village, are you not?" Her breath hitched. The words, though spoken with a chilling formality, resonated deep within her. The cadence, the subtle inflection, the underlying power. It was undeniably familiar. Her mind reeled. It couldn't be. It was impossible. "Speak, girl," one of the guards behind her snapped, giving her a rough push. Ilara stared at the king, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. He was looking at her, not with anger, but with an intensity that seemed to peel back layers of her soul. His voice, the cold, commanding, yet strangely comforting voice that had been her sole companion, her guide, her strength through the terror and isolation of her journey. It was his, the Alpha King Theron. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. "I am Ilara." A flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher crossed his icy eyes. "You are accused of consorting with the banished, of defying the ancient laws. Do you deny these charges?" His voice, the voice that had so recently told her to hide her fear, now demanded her confession. Ilara felt a strange dichotomy of emotions, the fear of her captor warring with the shocking, undeniable sense of connection to the voice that now emanated from him. She knew this voice. It was his voice, and suddenly, the overwhelming grandeur of the throne room, the stern faces of the guards, even the terrifying accusations, seemed to blur around the edges. All that remained was the king's face, his eyes like ice, and the profound, bewildering realization that the voice in her head belonged to the man on the throne. A strange connection. The cavernous throne room, once a distant echo of Theron's pronouncements, now resonated with a chilling familiarity. The same deep baritone that had whispered warnings and guidance through her darkest nights now thundered accusations from the dais. Her breath hitched. The king. It was him. The realization hit Ilara with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs and leaving her reeling. Her mind, usually a chaotic storm of worry and speculation, was suddenly still, transfixed by this impossible truth. She stared, not at the ornate crown or the fur-lined cloak, but into his eyes the colour of a winter sky, sharp and assessing, yet holding a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. A wave of heat, unfamiliar and potent, spread through her chest, a strange counterpoint to the icy shock gripping her. It was a sensation she'd felt before, though never this intensely. A quiet hum of recognition, like two distant magnets finally drawn together. The world narrowed to just the two of them, the guards, the advisors, the very air in the room fading into a blurred periphery. King Theron, in turn, felt a subtle shift within himself. As his gaze locked with Ilara's, the familiar weight of his duties seemed to momentarily lighten. He'd expected defiance, perhaps fear, but not the unwavering intensity he found in her sapphire eyes. A strange current, like static electricity, arced between them. It was a sensation he couldn't recall ever experiencing, not with any subject, not with any queen, not even in the quiet solitude of his own chambers. He'd seen countless faces pass before his throne, read countless intentions in their expressions, but hers was different. There was a raw vulnerability there, yes, but also an unyielding spirit, a fire that resonated with something deep within him. An unfamiliar warmth bloomed in his chest, startling in its unexpectedness. It was an unsettling feeling for a man accustomed to emotional austerity, a man who had built his reign on cold logic and unwavering control. He watched her, a knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. The girl before him, accused of consorting with the banished, stood accused of defying ancient laws, yet she carried an aura of innocence that clashed with the gravity of the charges. His inner voice, the one that usually offered clear, decisive judgment, was unusually quiet, replaced by a low thrum of intrigue. He found himself wanting to know more, to understand the spark he saw in her eyes, to unravel the mystery of the strange pull he felt. "You stand accused of consorting with the banished." Theron's voice boomed again, though this time it held a barely perceptible tremor that only he would recognize. "The penalty for such a transgression is severe." A hushed silence descended upon the court, the advisers exchanging uneasy glances. This was a king known for his swift and unyielding justice. Alara swallowed, her throat dry. The warmth in her chest pulsed, urging her forward, even as her rational mind screamed for caution. She felt a connection, a profound and bewildering thread tying her to this formidable man, her accuser. Theron paused, his gaze still fixed on Alara. The decision, when it came, surprised even him. It was an impulse, a deviation from protocol, from everything he stood for. But the strange warmth persisted, compelling him. "However," he continued, his voice resonating with a newfound authority, "I find myself intrigued. There are aspects to this case that demand further scrutiny." A collective gasp rippled through the courtiers. Further scrutiny, for such a clear-cut crime. "Therefore," Theron declared, his voice firm, "instead of immediate imprisonment, the accused, Alara of the Sunstone Valley, will remain within the castle walls. She will be housed and attended to, under constant guard, until I deem her fate." "This is not a reprieve," he warned, his eyes sweeping across the stunned faces, "but an extension of my judgment. Do I make myself clear?" A chorus of murmured agreements followed, though the confusion in the room was palpable. Alara, however, felt a different kind of shock. Confined to the castle, not a dungeon. The warm feeling intensified, a strange mixture of apprehension and a nascent hope. Her captor, her guide, had just offered her a lifeline, a bewildering act of mercy from the man who held her very existence in his hands. The connection, whatever it was undeniable and terrifying. Silent conversations. The heavy oak door of her allocated chambers clicked shut with a thud that echoed the finality of her situation. Alara traced the ornate carvings on the four-poster bed, its silken drapes a stark contrast to the rough-spun fabrics she was accustomed to. She was a prisoner, albeit one housed in unexpected luxury. The guards stationed outside her door, she knew, were a constant reminder of her precarious freedom. "You're safe, for now, little one." A voice, familiar and resonant, pulsed in her mind. It was the voice that had saved her from the cliff's edge, the voice that had guided her through the treacherous forest, the voice of King Theron. A jolt ran through her. He was speaking to her, not with his lips, but within the confines of her own skull. "How?" She started to form a question, but the thought remained unspoken, a nascent whisper in her consciousness. "Do not voice your thoughts aloud." His mental reply was immediate, a deep current flowing beneath the surface of her own awareness. "Others might hear. Just think your response. I will hear it." Alara closed her eyes, focusing. This was bewildering, terrifying, yet also undeniably intimate. She pictured the king's striking features, the intensity in his eyes that had held her captive moments before. "You're the one who accused me," she projected, a mix of accusation and bewilderment. "You're the one who saved me." A low, resonant chuckle reverberated in her mind, a sound only she could perceive. A paradox indeed. Life is full of them. You are where you need to be, Alara. Trust in that. The following days were a dance of unspoken words. King Theron would summon her to the Grand Library, ostensibly for her to read ancient texts, a task he assigned with a detached air. But as she sat, her fingers tracing the brittle pages, his thoughts would drift into hers. Observations about the kingdom, faint echoes of his frustrations with advisors, sometimes even a flicker of curiosity about her past. She learned to respond, her thoughts a silent counterpoint to his. She described the scent of the forest after rain, the simple joy of finding a wild berry patch, the fear that had gripped her when the banished sought her out. He absorbed it all, a silent, attentive presence in her mind. These silent exchanges did not go unnoticed. The castle staff, accustomed to the king's stoic silence and formidable presence, observed a subtle shift. When Alara was in his proximity, Theron's jaw would often clench, or a faint, almost imperceptible smile would touch the corners of his lips. He would sometimes pause mid-sentence during a conversation with an advisor, his gaze drifting to Alara, a distant, thoughtful expression on his face. The advisors, particularly Lord Caelan, the king's most trusted and traditional confidant, exchanged wary glances. They saw the king's eyes fix on Alara, a young woman accused of a grave offence, and noted her own subtle reactions. A sudden flush, a slight tremor in her hands, a faint tightening of her lips. They saw a connection forming, a bond that transcended spoken words, and it fueled their disquiet. Whispers began to circulate through the stone corridors. "She has bewitched him. A dark magic is at play. The king is distracted by this peasant." One afternoon, as Alara sat by a large window overlooking the castle gardens, Theron's mental voice broke through her reverie. "Caelan believes you are a threat to my rule." Ilara's breath hitched. "Am I?" she thought, a knot forming in her stomach. "Perhaps," he mused, his mental tone surprisingly devoid of judgment. "But not in the way he imagines. You challenge my preconceived notions, Alara, and that, in itself, is a kind of threat to the established order." She looked up then, her eyes meeting his across the vast library. He was seated at his massive desk, a scroll spread before him, yet his gaze was locked on hers. In that moment, the silent connection thrummed, a tangible force between them, visible only to them. The air in the room seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, and Lord Caelan, standing near the king's desk, paused in his report, his eyes narrowed, sensing the invisible conversation unfolding before him. The mystery surrounding Alara, and the king's baffling decision to keep her so close, deepened with every silent exchange. Whispers of danger. The opulent cage of Alara's chambers offered little solace from the pervasive unease that now clung to her like a second skin. Lord Caelan's watchful eyes, along with those of countless other courtiers, tracked her every movement, their whispers a constant, low thrum beneath the castle's ancient stones. Yet within this suffocating scrutiny, a curious shift was underway. During daily meals in the grand dining hall, a cavernous space where even a spoon clinking against porcelain echoed, the king's presence became Alara's unexpected shield. She'd observe the pointed glares, feel the weight of unspoken accusations, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of Theron's hand, a fractional tightening of his jaw, would silence the most audacious murmurs. Once, a particularly venomous dowager, her face a roadmap of disapproval, began to speak of dark influences tainting the king's judgment. Before she could finish, Theron's voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the very floorboards, cut her off. "Lady Isolde," he'd stated, his gaze like shards of ice, "your concern is noted. My judgment, however, is not a matter for public debate." The dowager had withered under his stare, her words dying in her throat. Alara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a flicker of something akin to protection. Their telepathic exchanges continued. a secret language woven into the fabric of their days. Theron, she discovered, was a man burdened by an immense solitude. Even amidst the bustling court, surrounded by advisors and petitioners, an invisible wall seemed to encircle him. She'd watch him during council meetings, his broad shoulders hunched slightly under the weight of his crown, his expression habitually grim. Decisions of war, famine, and justice rested solely on his pronouncements, and the toll it took was etched in the faint lines around his eyes, the perpetual tension in his brow. "You carry a great weight," she thought to him one evening, as he sat alone in the vast throne room, long after the last courtier had departed, staring into the flickering embers of a dying fire. The guards at the doors were mere shadows, their presence a testament to his isolation. He didn't reply immediately, but she felt a ripple of surprise, a momentary lowering of his defences. "It is the burden of a king," his thoughts finally echoed, laced with a weariness that surprised her. She had always seen him as invincible, a force of nature. To sense such vulnerability, even telepathically, was disarming. She watched as he rose, his movements fluid despite the day's relentless demands, and walked to the high arched window, gazing out at the moonlit castle grounds. The silence in the throne room was profound, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a lone wolf. He looked utterly alone, a solitary figure against the vast, indifferent night. "Do you ever just rest?" she ventured, a soft inquiry that felt intrusive, even in the privacy of their minds. A flicker of a memory, distant and fleeting, brushed against her own, a child, small and lost, navigating a labyrinth of expectations. "Rest is a luxury I cannot afford," he communicated, the thought laced with a bitter edge she hadn't detected before. A king is always awake, always vigilant. Ilara felt a pang of something she hadn't anticipated. Empathy. This formidable Alpha King, her accuser and savior, was not just a powerful entity, but a man profoundly isolated by his own station. The gilded cage of her imprisonment suddenly seemed less confining, less lonely than the silent, heavy crown he wore. His life, she realized, was a relentless succession of demands and judgments, with no one truly beside him. A strange, fragile thread of understanding began to weave itself between them, thin but resilient, tying her not just to her captor, but to a man bearing an unimaginable burden. This burgeoning connection, however, carried its own quiet dangers, a silent challenge to the established order that pulsed just beneath the surface of the castle's placid facade. The whispers, though muted by Theron's presence, continued to grow, shifting from mere speculation to darker pronouncements. Lord Kaelin's eyes, in particular, seemed to gleam with a new, unsettling intensity whenever Ilara was in the king's vicinity. The air around them crackled with unspoken tension, a rising storm that Theron, for all his power, might not be able to quell indefinitely. The Elder's Warning. The tap on the heavy oak door was soft, almost deferential, yet it cut through the muted hum of the king's chambers. Theron, hunched over a stack of parchment detailing border skirmishes, granted his permission to enter. An elderly man, his silver hair a wispy halo around a deeply lined face, shuffled in. Elder Gareth, the castle's ancient lawmaster and a distant relative of the royal line, rarely sought private audiences unless the matter was dire. "Your Majesty," Gareth began, his voice a dry rustle of autumn leaves. His eyes, though clouded with age, held a sharp, knowing glint. "Forgive my intrusion, but there is a delicate matter I feel compelled to discuss." Theron set down his quill, a frown creasing his brow. "Speak freely, Elder. Has something happened?" He braced himself for another missive of unrest from the southern territories or news of a fresh squabble amongst the noble houses. Gareth took a shallow breath, his gaze sweeping across the opulent room before settling back on the king. It concerns the unique circumstances of the guest residing in the Western Wing, specifically the bond that seems to have formed between you and the Lady Alara. Theron's jaw tightened. He had been meticulously careful, or so he thought, to mask the true nature of his connection with Alara. He'd deflected accusations, subtly steered conversations, yet the elder, with his uncanny perception, had seen past the facade. "I am not sure I understand your meaning, Elder," Theron said, his tone carefully neutral, though an icy tremor ran down his spine. "A mind bond, Your Majesty," Gareth stated plainly, his eyes unwavering. Not a commonplace telepathic gift, but a profound melding of consciousness. A rare occurrence, whispered about in ancient texts, often dismissed as myth. He moved closer, leaning on a polished walking stick, his presence now less frail, more imposing. Such a bond, when it does manifest, is said to be a signifier of immense import, either a destined union that will bring unparalleled strength and prosperity to a kingdom, or a prelude to a catastrophe that could shatter it. Theron's carefully constructed composure began to crack. Catastrophe. The word echoed ominously in his mind, resonating with his own unspoken fears. He'd felt the bond, the strange, intrusive connection, but he'd intellectualized it, rationalized it as a peculiar side effect of their initial encounter. He'd focused on its utility, its comfort, rather than its potential implications. "Ancient texts often exaggerate, Elder," Theron countered, his voice rougher than he intended. "These are old wives' tales, not prophecies." Gareth's faint smile held no mirth, perhaps, but these tales, Your Majesty, speak of bonds that tie two souls irrevocably, bonds that can share joy and sorrow, but also amplify doubt and fear. They speak of a connection so deep that one's very essence can be influenced by the other. And should that connection be severed, the repercussions could be devastating for both parties. Theron pushed away from his desk, pacing the length of the room. The elder's words painted a stark, unsettling picture. He had sought refuge in Alara's mind, a quiet harbour from the relentless demands of his crown, a space where he could simply be. He hadn't considered it a potential weapon, a vulnerability. His connection to Alara, which had felt like a secret solace, now felt like a ticking charge. "What is your counsel then, Elder?" Theron finally asked, his voice strained. The weight of his kingship, already a crushing burden, seemed to double with Gareth's revelation. Gareth met his gaze, his ancient eyes filled with a profound sorrow. "Only time will tell, Your Majesty, whether this bond is a blessing or a curse, but you must understand its power. It is not something to be trifled with. Observe it, understand it, for in its depths lies either the salvation of our people or their undoing. And remember, such connections are rarely welcomed by those who do not understand them. Suspicion, fear, and even jealousy can turn a powerful bond into a target." The elder bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that nonetheless carried a heavy warning, and then quietly exited, leaving Theron alone in the silence of his chambers. The parchment on his desk lay forgotten. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and strategic thought, was now a turbulent sea, churned by Gareth's words. The fragile connection with Alara, once a source of bewildering comfort, now felt like a precipice. He had to protect her, not just from the court, but from the terrifying potential of their own unforeseen destiny. A fierce protection. The tapestries in Alara's chambers vibrated with the silent scrutiny of unseen eyes. Each rustle of silk, every groan of the ancient floorboards resonated with an implicit judgment. She had grown accustomed to the soft metallic clicks of the locks, the unyielding sentinels beyond her door, whose silent vigil was a constant tether to her conditional freedom. Yet a novel unease had begun to unfurl, a sense of something coiled and waiting. One afternoon, seeking respite, Ilara drifted towards the balcony, drawn by the vibrant spectacle of the setting sun bleeding across the distant mountains. The air was cool, carrying the faint perfume of pine and distant hearth smoke. As she leaned against the ornate railing, her gaze sweeping over the meticulously sculpted gardens below, a sudden, sharp report cracked from the wall beside her. "Down, now!" Theron's voice ripped through her consciousness, a raw, primal bellow that bypassed thought and plunged straight into instinct. This wasn't the measured, resonant tone she knew. This was pure command, edged with a fury that tightened her gut. Without a moment's hesitation, Ilara dropped to her knees, scrambling back from the railing, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The very next instant, a massive stone gargoyle, dislodged from its perch on the facade above, plummeted with a sickening impact, shattering precisely where she had stood moments before. Shards of ancient stone exploded outward, one scoring her arm, leaving a stinging welt. A gasp tore from her throat, quickly swallowed by the thunderous pounding of her own blood. She stared at the wreckage, at the dust still dancing in the golden light, a cold dread solidifying in her bones. This was no accident. The gargoyle was old, certainly, but its fall had been too deliberate. Suddenly, the chamber door burst inward, splintering against the wall. Theron stood framed in the opening, his eyes ablaze, a terrifying tempest brewing beneath his usually impassive exterior. He strode towards her with predatory grace, a coiled spring of pure rage. His gaze swept over the shattered stone, then locked onto her, her trembling form, the dust clinging to her hair, the fresh scrape on her arm. He knelt before her, his large hand gently cupping her chin, turning her face to assess the injury. His touch, typically a controlled hum of energy, was now steady, imbued with an intensity that bordered on pain. His thumb brushed over her cut, and a low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so guttural, so profoundly animal, it sent a shiver down her spine. "Who?" His voice reverberated in her mind, not a question, but a demand steeped in lethal promise. He didn't await a verbal answer. The inquiry served as a conduit, an opening for her terror and relief to flood into him. He felt the echo of her near miss, the precipice she had skirted, and it ignited something fierce and terrifying within him. He rose abruptly, his eyes sweeping the room as if searching for an invisible assailant. The guards, drawn by the commotion, now stood rigid in the doorway, their faces ashen. Theron ignored them, his focus entirely on the threat, on her. A cold fury settled over him, displacing the familiar weariness that often shadowed his features. This was not a thief, nor a political maneuver targeting him. This was a direct assault on Ilara, his prisoner, his charge, his responsibility. But it was more than mere duty. The sheer terror that had seized him in that split second, the frantic, desperate urge to shield her, was a revelation. It was a visceral, gut-wrenching realization of how deeply she had burrowed under his skin, how vital her presence had become. He had felt the world tilt on its axis at the thought of losing her, a chasm opening beneath him. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply, then opened them, the raw power in their depths almost overwhelming. "Find whoever did this," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous, addressing the stunned guards. "I want every stone, every piece of mortar inspected. Find the weakness, find the hand that exploited it, and when you do... His gaze sharpened, promising a fate worse than death. Bring them to me. He turned back to Alara, his expression still etched with fury, but now softened by a desperate protectiveness. He extended a hand, and she, without conscious thought, placed hers in it. Her fingers trembled, but his grip was firm, anchoring her. As he pulled her gently to her feet, his mind voice, though still edged with rage, held a new, profound note of something akin to awe. "You are safe. I will ensure it." The words weren't a promise, they were an unbreakable oath. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of a deadly trap, King Theron understood, with chilling clarity, the fierce, uncompromising depth of his burgeoning feelings for Alara. It was a dangerous, unwelcome truth, but one he could no longer deny. Truth seekers. The scent of ozone still clung to the air in Alara's chambers, a stark reminder of the gargoyle's shattered remains on the courtyard flagstones below. Yet, an unfamiliar courage bloomed within her chest, pushing past the lingering fear. Theron's ferocity in her defense, his raw, unmasked fury, had shifted something fundamental within her. She was no longer just his prisoner, nor merely a pawn in a larger game. She was protected. And that protection, coupled with the startling intimacy of their mental link, stirred a desire to reciprocate. When he arrived later that evening, the heavy velvet of his cloak seemed to absorb the candlelight, making him appear even more imposing. Yet there was a flicker of exhaustion in his deep-set eyes. He moved with a predator's grace, but the subtle slump of his shoulders spoke of burdens. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual clipped authority, almost hesitant. Alara met his gaze, feeling the familiar hum of their connection, a gentle current beneath the surface. "I am, thanks to you." She paused, then took a step closer, an unprecedented act of defiance against the invisible barriers between them. "King Theron, I want to help." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise softening the hard lines of his face. "Help with what, Alara?" "With finding who truly stole the locket, and who tried to silence me today." Her voice gained strength with each word. "The voice, sometimes it gives me clues, fragments. I believe it can help us." Theron's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in contemplation. The unspoken truth of their bond hung between them, a fragile, intricate thing. He had always been the sole recipient of his own thoughts, a solitary mind in a kingdom of millions. Now, Alara had access, however fragmented, to his inner workings, to clues he might inadvertently offer. The thought was both unnerving and, perhaps, hopeful. "It's a risk," he stated, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing. "The court already murmurs. For you to be seen investigating, it could be misconstrued." "Let them murmur," Alara retorted, a spark in her eyes. "They already accuse me. What more can they do?" She saw a ghost of a smile touch his lips, fleeting but real. "Besides," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we have our own way of communicating, don't we? No one needs to know everything." A long moment stretched between them, filled with the unspoken understanding that had become the bedrock of their strange alliance. Finally, Theron nodded, a decisive gesture. "Very well. We begin with the locket. The initial investigation was thorough, but perhaps incomplete." He led her from her chambers, not through the main corridors, but through a series of dimly lit servants' passages, their footsteps muffled by thick tapestries. The contrast between the public display of his authority and this secret, almost clandestine movement with her, his supposed prisoner, was not lost on Alara. It felt like a shared secret, an act of rebellion. Their destination was a small, cluttered office tucked away in a less frequented wing of the castle, a place where discarded ledgers and forgotten scrolls piled high. Theron gestured towards a heavy iron-bound chest on a dust-laden table. This contains copies of the initial reports, eyewitness accounts, inventory logs. As Alara began to sift through the brittle parchment, scanning the detailed descriptions of the stolen locket and the frantic entries of its disappearance, she felt Theron's presence beside her, a steady warmth. His mind, usually a torrent of commands and concerns, was now focused, a quiet hum. Suddenly a word, sharp and clear, pierced the quiet space of her mind, echoing Theron's inner monologue. Engraved. Alara froze, her fingers hovering over a report detailing the locket's unique craftsmanship. Engraved, she murmured aloud, startling Theron. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and profound recognition. What about it? The voice, she explained, her gaze fixed on the parchment. It just said engraved. Is there something specific about the engraving? She quickly found the relevant section. It mentions a single intricately carved rosebud on the reverse. Is that significant? Theron leaned closer, his broad shoulder brushing hers. Yes, it's a family crest, a minor branch, long thought extinct. The locket was a gift from my grandmother to a distant cousin, a symbol of a forgotten lineage. His voice was low, thoughtful. The thief would have to know its true significance, not just its material value. It wasn't just a locket. It was a statement. A new layer of intrigue settled over them. It wasn't a simple theft after all. It was personal, and with this new clue, their hunt for the truth had just begun. The jealous advisor. The cool, dusty air of the archives settled around them, a stark contrast to the burning intensity of Theron's gaze as he sifted through the ancient texts. Alara sat opposite him at a long oak table, parchment spread between them like a battle map. The rosebud crest, now etched into her mind, pulsed with a quiet energy, a silent beacon guiding her thoughts. She watched Theron, his brows furrowed in concentration, the subtle flex of his jaw revealing a deeply rooted tenacity. A strange sense of belonging bloomed within her chest, a feeling she hadn't known since before the voice. The crest belongs to the Ashworth lineage, Theron finally murmured, his voice a low rumble. A minor house, faded into obscurity centuries ago. No one has claimed that sigil in generations. Alara's mind reached out, a gentle tendril of thought, touching the edges of his own. But someone remembers it. The image of the locket, so vivid in her mind's eye, superimposed itself over the faded sketches of the Ashworth crest in an old genealogy book. The similarity was undeniable. Theron's gaze met hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared revelation. If it's a forgotten crest, why would someone steal it, then leave it at the scene of an attempted murder? Not just attempted murder, Alara thought, a shiver running down her spine. Attempted silencing. The gargoyle had been a brutal, efficient instrument, meant to finish what the theft had started. They worked in tandem, a rhythm developing between them that bypassed spoken words. Theron unearthed old court records, land deeds, and correspondence, while Alara's intuition, sharpened by their bond, nudged him towards seemingly insignificant details. A forgotten marginalia in a ledger, a faded ink blot on a decree, a name mentioned too frequently in the peripheral of another's rise. The name that kept resurfacing was Advisor Valerius, a man known for his meticulous order, his unwavering loyalty, and a quiet, simmering ambition that had always been just beneath the surface of his deferential demeanour. Valerius has served the crown for 40 years, Theron stated, his voice devoid of emotion, but Alara felt the tremor of unease ripple through their connection. He was once a close confidant to my father. And now he feels overlooked, Ilara's mind supplied, a sudden chilling clarity descending. The image of Valerius, standing stiffly in court, his eyes often drifting towards Theron's private chambers, his expression a mask of polite deference that never quite reached his eyes. A cold certainty settled in Theron's gaze. "Bring advisor Valerius to the great hall," he commanded a passing guard. His voice was calm, but the underlying power in it made the stone walls vibrate. Valerius arrived, his usually impeccable robes slightly rumpled, a faint pallor to his usually ruddy complexion. He bowed low before Theron, a practiced movement honed over decades. "Your Majesty, how may I be of service?" His voice was smooth, but Ilara's senses, heightened by her bond with Theron, picked up a faint tremor. Theron held up a heavy, leather-bound book. "Valerius, do you recognize this crest?" He pointed to the faded rosebud. Valerius's eyes, usually sharp and discerning, darted to the image, then quickly away. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed his face, too fleeting for an untrained eye to catch, but not for Ilara. "It is an old design, Your Majesty. Perhaps from a forgotten house?" Valerius's tone was dismissive, almost too casual. "Indeed," Theron said, his voice dangerously soft. "The Ashworth crest, and it just so happens to be etched on a locket that was stolen from the royal treasury. A locket that later appeared at the scene of an attempt on Lady Ilara's life." Valerius stiffened, his eyes flicking to Ilara, then back to Theron. "Your Majesty, I assure you, I know nothing of this." "Do you not?" Theron's voice hardened, the alpha command resonating through the hall. "Or do you merely wish to forget the shame of your own lineage?" Valerius flinched, a visible tremor running through his frame. "My lineage is honourable, Your Majesty." "The Ashworths were indeed honourable," Theron conceded, his voice laced with venom, "until their line dwindled to a single desperate branch, a branch that, after years of service to the crown, felt unjustly overlooked. A branch that saw a chance to reclaim a forgotten legacy, perhaps even elevate their standing by framing an innocent and attempting to silence her before she could expose the truth." Ilara watched Valerius crumple, the carefully constructed facade of decades shattering under Theron's relentless gaze. The advisor's eyes, now filled with a desperate, bitter resignation, met hers. You were always the favourite," Valerius choked out, his voice hoarse. "Even when you were just a commoner, my father, he spoke of your spirit, your courage. He always said you were destined for great things, things I, a loyal servant, could only dream of. The locket. It was a reminder of what was lost, what could have been. I tried to make you disappear, to make him see me." The confession hung heavy in the air, a testament to the corrosive power of jealousy and ambition. Theron's face remained unreadable, but Ilara felt a wave of profound sorrow emanating from him, a deep disappointment in a man he had once trusted. The hunt for the truth was over, but the cost, Ilara realized, was immense. A gift for the kingdom. The grand hall buzzed with an unusual energy, a mixture of apprehension and barely contained curiosity. Ilara stood beside Theron, her heart a drum against her ribs. Yet a strange sense of calm settled over her, a direct echo of the unwavering presence in her mind. Today was not just about her innocence, it was about their truth, laid bare for a kingdom to judge. Theron stepped forward, his voice, usually a resonant bass, now carried an unfamiliar weight, cutting through the murmurs like a honed blade. "People of the court, for weeks a shadow has lingered over this castle, a grave injustice perpetrated under my very roof. An innocent has been wronged, accused of a crime she did not commit." His gaze swept across the assembled nobles, lingering on the faces of those who had whispered most venomously. The theft of the Ashworth crest and the subsequent attack on Alara's life were orchestrated by Valerius, motivated by a personal vendetta against the crown and a desire to reclaim a lost legacy. He has confessed. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Faces shifted from surprise to shock, then to a spectrum of relief, resentment, and even a flicker of disappointment from those who had revelled in Alara's misfortune. Lord Caelan, always a staunch critic, looked aghast, while Lady Lyra, who had offered Alara veiled kindness, offered a small, knowing smile. Alara felt a wave of profound relief wash over her, like cool water after a long trek. The weight of suspicion, the silent accusations, finally lifted. Theron paused, letting the revelation sink in. Then, his eyes usually guarded, softened as they met Alara's. A silent conversation passed between them, a warmth spreading through her chest from their deep connection. He turned back to the court, his voice taking on a new, more intimate tone that still resonated with power. Alara, far from being a suspect, has been a singular asset in uncovering this truth. Her unique intuition and a connection that defies explanation guided us through the darkest corners of this deceit. He extended a hand, and Alara, in a gesture that felt both public and intensely personal, took it. The gasp this time was louder, more widespread. Whispers erupted, quickly quelled by the sheer force of Theron's presence. "This connection," Theron continued, his voice now imbued with a profound conviction that silenced every dissenting thought, "is not a weakness, nor a threat. It is a gift, a rare and powerful bond that has proven its worth in protecting this kingdom from unseen enemies. Alara is not just a friend, not merely an ally. She is a vital part of its future, and indeed, mine." Alara felt her breath catch. The declaration, so public, so absolute, resonated not just in her ears but deep within her soul. The isolation she had carried, the quiet fear of being an outsider, began to dissipate, replaced by a nascent feeling of belonging. She saw the varied reactions, awe on some faces, outright hostility on others, but beneath it all, an undeniable sense of Theron's authority. This was not a king making a political statement. This was a man laying bare a truth, daring anyone to challenge it. This bond. Theron's voice deepened, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his court, is a beacon, illuminating paths we could not otherwise see. It is a strength that will protect us, and a promise of a new era of understanding. I, Theron, Alpha King, declare Alara's innocence, and affirm her place not just within these castle walls, but within the very fabric of this kingdom. A hushed silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the hearth. Alara felt a surge of purpose, a clarity she hadn't known before. The whispers might continue, the skeptics might remain, but Theron had drawn a line, declaring their connection a strength, a gift for the kingdom. She looked at him, truly seeing the burden in his eyes, the weight of a kingship he carried with such weariness, and knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would stand with him, shoulder to shoulder, against whatever trials lay ahead. The future, once a murky unknown, now shimmered with possibility, a tapestry woven with threads of their shared destiny. The warmest friendship. The collective gasp that rippled through the great hall had been almost as deafening as Theron's declaration. Alara felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, not judging, but now assessing, contemplating this new reality. The Alpha King, her erstwhile captor, and now her staunch defender, stood before his court, his hand still resting lightly on her arm, a silent testament to the words he'd just spoken. The relief that washed over Alara was so profound, it left her lightheaded, a sweet, dizzying sensation after weeks of suffocating fear. This wasn't just exoneration, it was an invitation, a solemn vow. Later, in the quietude of her chambers, no longer a gilded cage, but a comfortable room with a view of the sprawling capital, Theron came to her. The formal robes of kingship had been shed for simpler attire, yet the aura of command remained. He didn't speak immediately, simply watched her as she gazed out the window at the distant, sparkling river. "You are free to leave, Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated in her mind as much as in the air. "To return to your village, or go wherever you wish." Alara turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "And trade this for what? The whispers of scandal, the pitying glances, or perhaps the loneliness of a life I no longer quite fit into?" She took a step closer. "You said I was a vital asset, that our bond was rare. Do you still believe that, Theron?" His eyes, the colour of storm clouds, met hers. "More than ever." The admission was raw, stripped of the usual regal decorum. "My life, it is not one of ease. It is solitude, duty, constant vigilance, the voice, your presence. It has brought a clarity I did not know I lacked." Alara felt a pull, a deep, undeniable connection that transcended mere words. It wasn't just affection, though a burgeoning warmth bloomed within her chest when she looked at him. It was a sense of purpose, of belonging she hadn't known she craved. "Then I will stay," she declared, her voice firm, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as a trusted advisor, as a friend. A flicker of something akin to surprise, then profound relief crossed Theron's face. "Friend," he repeated, the word tasting unfamiliar, yet not unwelcome on his tongue. And so, Alara's new life in the capital began. The court, initially wary, slowly began to adjust to her presence. Theron, true to his word, made her an integral part of his inner circle. She sat in council meetings, her unique intuition proving itself invaluable. Where others saw only numbers and precedents, Alara often perceived the underlying currents of discontent or the subtle shifts in allegiances, guided by the silent, steady hum of Theron's thoughts in her mind. Their bond deepened, becoming a seamless weave of shared thoughts and unspoken understanding. During long hours in the war room, reviewing maps and troop movements, Alara would offer a quiet observation, often prompted by a flash of insight received directly from Theron's strategic mind. "The northern patrols," she might say, her gaze fixed on a distant point on the map. "They feel stretched, almost inviting a challenge." Theron would nod, his brow furrowed, already adjusting his plans. His advisors, initially perplexed by her sudden pronouncements, soon learned to trust her input, seeing how often her insights aligned perfectly with Theron's own unvoiced concerns. Their days were filled with governance, their nights often spent in companionable silence, sharing meals or simply reading in the vast royal library. The oppressive weight of his solitude, which Alara had keenly felt from him in the early days of their connection, slowly began to lift. He spoke more freely, sharing burdens and triumphs, and listening intently to her perspectives, which were refreshingly unburdened by courtly politics. She, in turn, found a quiet strength in his presence, a steadfast anchor in a world that had once seemed chaotic and threatening. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun streamed through the castle's stained-glass windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, Theron presided over a dispute between two rival noble houses. The tension was palpable, the air thick with suppressed anger. Alara sat beside him, her hand resting discreetly on the armrest of his throne, her mind a quiet conduit for his growing frustration. He was weary. The endless squabbles drained him. "Peace, Theron." Her thought echoed in his mind, soft as a caress. "Listen to their fear, not their anger." He paused, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. He leaned forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "I understand your grievances," he said, addressing the feuding lords. "But what I hear beneath them is a common desire for security, for your families to thrive. Let us build upon that, rather than tear each other down." His words, infused with Alara's quiet counsel, resonated differently, cutting through the animosity. A compromise was reached, a fragile peace forged. The kingdom, once fraught with whispers and suspicion, began to settle. Theron, no longer burdened by the immense, crushing weight of his kingship alone, ruled with a renewed vigor and a broader perspective. His decisions, often informed by Alara's unique intuition and their combined wisdom, brought a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity. Their unique connection, once a source of fear and suspicion, became a symbol of unity. It was no longer a secret, but a known truth, a testament to a new kind of leadership where strength was tempered by understanding and solitude was replaced by the warmest of friendships. The Alpha King, once a formidable, unapproachable figure, now bore a subtle lightness in his stride, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. And beside him, Alara, the girl once accused, walked with quiet confidence, her place in the kingdom and in Theron's life undeniably secure.